Hey guys, so I have a very special guest for this episode of the Untitled podcast that is on YouTube and not everywhere else. Um, a very dear friend of mine who's helped me a lot over the past few months and to whom I am very grateful, and who's here to share a bit of his life experience as very talented electrical and electronics design engineer, and the one and only winner of Ilya Smetsenko's Nanovoltmeter contest, Jaromir. So, welcome, Jaromir. Tell us a few things about yourself.
Hello, Alex. Thanks for introduction. Well, my name is Jaromir, and I am electronics engineer, designer from Slovakia. Uh, I do electronics since I was 8 or 9 years old, so I have a few decades of electronics work uh, behind me, and I hope there is a few decades waiting for me. Um, Last few years, I dug a little bit into test gear design and I released some open source projects in this area. So perhaps this is the topic we can discuss or anything you like. Really.
Yeah, so as most of the people who are watching, myself included, um, we all started I think, by taking stuff apart, um, unsuccessfully putting them back together. But then we started getting better at putting things together, and at some point we decided to make new things. So one of the questions that I asked Razvan a bit later in the interview, but I'll get out of the way first with you, is what were your favorite toys as a child?
Uh, One of my earliest thing I remember from my childhood is a picture of me sitting in corner of a room and having a screwdriver in my hand and dismantling one of my toy cars I got from my parents. And my mom also always remember how one of my dearest toys was screwdriver I borrowed from my father's tool set, and it was really before I could talk properly, so I was less than 2 years old, and she was always afraid of me falling down and hurting myself with the screwdriver. So this is one of my toys, but apart from that, also cars as usual for kids of my age.
Mm-hmm.
When I was older, I got some more creative toys like Lego.
Mm-hmm.
This was my really favorite toy for a long time. Yes, that is so much for toys. And
And
I'm not sure if it was toy, but when I was 8 or 9, I got my first electronics kit
mm,
to build simple circuits.
wow, that is to me at least, it seems quite early. So you got a very early start in your electronics career there. Um, if you don't mind asking, how old are you now?
I'm 38 now.
38. Okay. So you've been doing this for basically 30 years, uh,
Yes.
which is longer than I've been alive. So congratulations, and keep it up, because you've done an amazing job so far. And I'm curious, what is the general area of your day-to-day job? Like, what part of electronics do you do as a day job, if you can tell us?
Uh, right now, I'm in the field of home automation job.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the highest level of rocket science,
Mm-hmm.
but also this seemingly simple task can bring a lot of surprise and sometimes need a bit of research. But before that, I worked in semiconductor industry and I worked in optoelectronics
Mm-hmm.
area. That was my longest job in optoelectronics.
So you worked in a fab?
And mm, yes, it was company that was manufacturing fiber optic products,
Mm-hmm.
and mm, they started also little project regarding fiber Bragg grating sensors, so fiber optic sensors
Mm-hmm.
basically. And I was making the fiber optic sensor readout units.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's it. It was very interesting work in a not very well known area. So this is also interesting, but in different way than the job I'm doing right now.
So you had basically you had to do very high speed electronics, basically.
Uh, it wasn't very much about high speed. Base of or the heart of every one of the readout units was spectrum analyzer,
Mm-hmm.
usually working in near infrared region, about 1.5 micrometer, and the spectrometer has to resolve very precisely resolve spectral peaks
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in narrow range.
Oh, so you are doing, I got it, the other side of optoelectronics, the not the high speed, but the high resolution. So
Yes, yes,
everything,
yes, yes,
diffraction gratings, monochromators, and all sorts of
yes.
fancy optics to split light. And yeah, like the signal path showed the optical spectrum analyzers he had. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. What did you study? So you studied electronics and where?
I studied electronics at Slovak Technical University in Bratislava.
Okay. And
Uh,
how is the system there? How is it structured? How many years did you take? Do you have a master's degree or do you have just a bachelor's? How was your experience? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
yes, I have master degree, and it was a it was at time when getting master degrees took 5.5 years, four of which was for bachelor and 1.5 year for master degree. So it took me actually 6.5 years because I missed all my duties for when I was in first year, and I had to repeat the first year. So it took me a bit longer than usual, but at the end I made it. So everything was nice. Uh, Repeating the first year was actually not that bad because I had the chance to start freshly and then with a lot of gain experience.
Mm-hmm. And
For example, one of the valuable experience was not to expect a lot of electronics in the first year and really do my job of studying the more fundamental subjects like math and physics and so on. And that was the focus of the first 1 or perhaps 2 years.
And so I don't know if you saw my discussion with Razvan, but that was basically the same for us. We had 2 years of more or less raw theory, and then we got into the more specialized subjects. Was it about the same for you?
Yes, I listened to your discussion with Razvan, and it was kind of similar experience for me. So first 2 years were more or less raw theory, and then we split into the electronic students split into 3 groups for power electronics, microelectronics, and I studied in the smallest group. It was basically solid state electronics. So there was a little bit more focus on theory, on even on in the higher or later years of the study.
And on the whole, do you think your experience in university was positive, mixed, or not very enjoyable? How were your university years?
I would say it was mixed bag. Some of the subjects were quite boring and not really interesting for me. Some of them were really interesting and productive for me because it started my interest in things I didn't know before, and I couldn't, or I could get myself to study the thing, but it would take me longer, or I didn't have the direct impulse to do this. For example, I had one one subject dealing with test and measurement devices. So the end project of the subject was making or writing a software to exercise multimeter and power supply via GPIB and measure volt ampere characteristic of some diode or something. I don't know really,
So,
but it was really hands-on and practical experience, and before that I had no idea how to do those things, and perhaps it really helped me to push myself into the test and measurement territory.
so would you say that most of your subjects in university were more hands-on like this with projects, at least when you got into your later years, or you didn't do so many projects, you didn't have so much hands-on experience, and that was the exception, that course that you just mentioned about test and measurement equipment?
Yes, unfortunately, this was one of the exceptions during my study, and most of the subjects were more focused on theory and not very much on practice.
Okay, so the plot thickens. Apparently, you had basically about the same experience as Razvan and I had. That is very interesting. What made you choose this field in particular? Because you could have become a wonderful mechanics engineer or optics engineer, or anything else, because there's many very highly refined disciplines that a technically minded person can study. But what made you choose electronics in particular?
Was there a question do you mean what made me choose to study electronics at the
Yes,
university?
yes, yes, yes.
Well, for me it was no-brainer choice because I was doing electronics as a hobby for years at the time, so I didn't really consider very much of other choices.
Okay, I was onto something. Most of from a sample size of 3 by now, all electronics engineers that I've met and talked about this thing. So all the electronics engineers that I know so far, actually sample size is a bit larger, were electronics hobbyists before they became electronics engineers. So that goes to show that I don't really accept to include myself in the nomenclature of a true electronics engineer, yet I'm far too fresh in this field to put myself on the same pedestal as you. But most of electronics engineers these days have this same background, which is very interesting. So you were a hobbyist and probably had you didn't scrape your knees as much as burned your fingers with the soldering iron when you were a kid. Um, what is one of the projects that you felt like a massive accomplishment now looking back at things?
How much back should I look like into my early years or later
Early
years?
years, yeah. As early as you can remember, one of your eureka moments as a budding electronics hobbyist.
It was probably my first electronic circuit I ever built. It was beeper from two transistors and few other passive components, and a small speaker from a telephone. uh, Interesting is the speaker and all the other components were recycled from old electronics. Even the PCB I built it on was recycled from TV set. And the first project was really. Uh, I remember I found some schematic in hobby magazine dealing with electronics, and I built it, soldered it actually with very clumsily, but I somehow managed to do it, and it just worked, and it was beeping on one battery, 9 volts, I believe it was. And I let it beeping out until the battery drained because I was so happy about it. I showed it to everybody that I built my first circuit, and it worked. And
So
I believe I was 9 years old at the time, but I started to dig into electronics earlier than that. I started to read some books and so on. It made absolutely no sense to me at the time, but I was reading it anyway, and I noticed that after many reading of the books, it somehow started to make sense to me.
you could feel
But
the
anyway,
pieces
the,
falling
the,
into place.
yes, 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 exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, the first project was the beeper from recycled components.
That's great. I'm really smiling thinking of all these things. It's actually absolutely great. Uh, okay. How does a day in your life, not necessarily at work, go? Like, I know you're a family man, and when do you have the time to focus on your hobbies? How do you strike a balance between life, your personal life, your hobby life, and your job?
Well, yes, I'm family man, so it takes a little bit of spare time. But anyway, I managed to find some time in the evenings when it's all quiet in the house, and I have my little workplace to work on my spare time projects. I need to balance the time I spend with electronics with the time I spend on sleeping. So if I overdo it on one side, uh, I have to I
Sacrifice
have
on the
to
other side.
yes, exactly. So when I work on electronics, I am very tired and sleepy. So the other evening I have to go to bed earlier. So there is no way I could allocate more than few hours of time for my electronics projects.
Per week.
Sorry?
Per week. A few hours per week.
Uh, no. Per day, it's like 2 or 3 hours per day.
Oh,
In 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 the good week or good days. Sometimes I cannot touch the electronics for a week or so because of reasons. But most of the time, a few hours per day.
that is remarkable. That is more than I expected. But then again, uh, I think that once you level up a bit in life, things start falling into place more than they are for me, for example, and you manage to have a very well defined schedule and stick to it, or not necessarily a schedule, but a balance which has been refined over years, and then you can devote yourself in very known proportions to all the pleasure and leisure and business activities and family and everything. So I think that's one thing that comes with age and experience. Um, yeah, congratulations. It's remarkable, and it goes to show because the next question that I was going to ask you is how much time do you think you spent in total working on your nanovoltmeter project?
Well, most of my spare time at the moment because the first revision of Nanovoltmeter is out, but during the development of the project with quite heavy deadline, I noticed a lot of things to improve in second version. So I'm getting it together at the moment, and I hope it will be out in a few months or so. But I do not work exclusively on the nanovoltmeter because the hobby should be still a hobby
Diversified.
and sorry.
Diversified.
Yes, exactly. I like to work on multiple projects at the same time. It has also a practical reasons. For example, when I'm waiting for PCBs or components to show up, I can work on something else in the meantime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you abide by another friend of ours' mentality, Marx, which is purchasing something, a piece of test equipment, gives you 1 unit of happiness, but finishing a project gives you 10 units of happiness. So the more projects you finish, the more units of happiness your brain receives.
Yes, exactly.
Um, I was going to ask you this, but it's kind of self-explanatory at this point. Do you see yourself more of a innovator or a fixer? So do you enjoy repairing or conceptualizing things?
Mm, that's actually a tough question
I'm glad.
because from my early days of electronics, I was kind of fixer, but in a slightly different way than you probably mean it. Because I was growing up in ex Eastern Bloc country in early 90s, and I didn't have too much of ways to acquire electronic components because it was simply too expensive for me. So I built all my electronics projects from recycled components. So whenever I read about there was a few electronics magazines I had available with schematics and circuits and so on. And anytime I needed to build something or I wanted to build something, I found out I don't have all the components that are in the circuit, but I have different components from recycled TV sets and radios and so on. So I had to fix the original circuit and use the components I had on hand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this was perhaps the thing that really forced me to think and to mm, to invent new things. So I would say this was the fixing part, uh, but it also brought the innovation part. So perhaps both of the things in a way.
Okay. That is very interesting. By the way, I want to do a small bracket here. Of course, you have to know about the PL500 tube.
Yes, of course.
Um,
Yes.
so it's for the viewers who don't know, the PL500. I am actually not supposed to know this because it's before my time, but the PL500 was a very important vacuum tube in all television sets that ran on vacuum tubes, and it was the line output transformer driver tube, and it was running in basically at the edges of its specifications, from what I understand, in most TV sets, and it was severely stressed all the time. And in Romania, at least, the PL500 was actually contraband. Like if you had a PL500 tube for your TV set and you've had spares, first of all, they were almost impossible to get a hold of, and they were valuable currency. So they were far more valuable currency than money in some cases because the corruption and stuff. And I'm very curious if that was the case for Slovakia as well.
Well, in former Czechoslovakia was the situation kind of similar to Romania, I believe, and I believe it was very similar to all the countries in the same political
Climate.
portion of the world, or how to say that. I didn't experience the 70s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s when the vacuum tube-based TV sets were mostly used. But from what I heard, PCL 85 was also in high demand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This was the tube used in
In the audio circuit.
no, in the vertical
Oh yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
vertical part of and the pentode was the actual the
Mm-hmm,
power amplifier, and the triode was oscillator. And
mm-hmm,
there was a problem with the tubes because as the pentode part was creating a lot of heat, it slowly uh,
Degraded
damaged,
the triode.
degraded, yes, the triode part, and the oscillator frequency was drifting away. So you had to, from time to time, you have to turn a little bit the trimmer resistor trimmer to set up the frequency back. But after some time, the trimmer was at the edge, and you couldn't set the frequency anymore. So you
Okay.
had to buy a new tube. In later years, there was a lot of hacks using transistor to replace the triode tube. So even if the pentode part was failing, the transistor was still working okay in the oscillator part. So yes, tubes were kind of difficult to get products.
What is, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping a bit from one question to the other, but I don't want us to get carried into too deep technical topics. So, what is one part of your day-to-day job that you've always found enjoyable over the years and over the jobs you've had? So one thing
Lunch.
that always stayed enjoyable and pleasant, and that you could always think about and be like, "Oh, I can't wait to do this," or "I'm very happy that I got to do that."
I will repeat it. It's lunch.
It's lunch. Okay.
Yes, for sure. It's the only thing that stayed constant during all the jobs I had. And the jobs are very different from each other. I don't think there is a single thing that is very that they have in common. From the technical parts, it's definitely designing a thing or coming out with the first sketches and first ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, the later work, like putting together documentation, is always the boring part.
I actually enjoy documentation. Uh, it's truly one thing that, for me at least, especially in one of my old jobs, documentation kind of tied everything up at the end and ensured that everything was done correctly and justified and foolproof and bulletproof and everything. But this was documentation for medical electronics, and although I didn't like it in the beginning, it was really quite enjoyable to do. Also, writing reports, and this is one of the conflicts that I have with coworkers and colleagues and stuff like that. It's not a conflict, it's more of a disagreement. I'm of the opinion that an engineer's main output should be prototypes and documentation. What do you think an engineer's main output should be?
Mm, it really depends because there is many flavors of engineers. In small companies, there is often one engineer for everything. There is a single guy who has to do the first inception of the idea, first the prototype, mm, some test procedures, um, manufacturing documentation, and then the final documentation. And also there in larger companies there are more specifically focused engineers. One is for the I know they have engineer for PCB layout, they're engineer for documentation and so on. So What was the question? Sorry.
I can't remember exactly. Uh, um, anyway, um, the what was so the question was, what do you think an engineer's main output should be? So when an engineer is done with a job, what should he have left, or she? What should they have left behind?
Oh yes, yes, yes. I remember now. So again, it depends on what is his job
Mm-hmm.
or her job, because in small companies, the engineer has to do everything. So his
Mm-hmm.
output
Everything.
is everything. For the more specialized engineering jobs, yes, again, documentation, yes, is the output, because uh, in situation where you have to leave and let the job for another engineer, what he really should start with is the documentation for the project you did. So yes, documentation is probably the word.
Um, this is one thing that I've caught myself doing, and I am so there's no easy way to put this thing, but I'm very curious. In your work experience so far, what was the distribution, like the percentage of men and women working as engineers that you've met so far, approximately?
Uh, are we talking about electronics, right?
Yeah,
Um, I would say most of the men and very few women in the field.
it's not a very attractive field for women. That is what I've noticed as well. So I don't know why, but and I have met very talented uh, electronics engineers, women. There's not very many of them, and I don't mean to go into the whole political correctness thing. And I think that everybody should do whatever the hell they want to do. But it would be great to get more women into this side of engineering, and into engineering as a whole. But as you've demonstrated and as you've shown, it's kind of hard to do. And one thing that I don't like about getting more women into this sort of job is big companies in general have very weird policies in hiring, and they sometimes employ um, equal percentages of men and women just to meet a quota. Uh, do you agree with this practice?
Uh, Quotas were never a good idea to solve any problems, so I don't think this is a good solution for this problem too. So I'm not sure. The yes, there is a very strong inequality
In the field, yeah.
in the field, but the reasons for that are probably not very
To explain, yes.
simple to explain and to name them. And I'm not even expert in this area, so I'm not sure if I should even try to talk about it.
I think you have saved us from being cancelled. But yes, so we're probably not the people to talk about. I was just curious because in my experience so far, it's kind of been the same. So the overwhelming majority were men, and there are usually very few women in the field. And I find it a pity. Even in university, there are very, very few girls in my groups, classrooms, whatever. And it's a pity, but yeah. All right. We're running out of questions, which means that we're very efficient and we have time to discuss about other topics. Um, so I have two questions regarding another very hot topic. Um, if you weren't a hardware design engineer or electronics engineer, basically, so Jaromir, I don't know, the mechanical engineer, for example, what would Jaromir, the mechanical engineer, think is more important, software or hardware these days?
Mm,
It's a trick question.
yes, it's a very tricky question because both of both of it are very important to know and learn because I've met a few mechanical engineers that were very good at CAD software or working with CAD software, and their designs were absolutely horrible and very difficult to manufacture because if you don't know the manufacturing
Process.
procedures,
Mm-hmm.
yes, your designs are usually really bad. But on the other hand, not using the advantages of modern CAD systems is really is really putting you away from the mainstream of design when it comes to electronics and mechanical engineering too. Uh, so you have to know both and use your experience and intelligence to determine uh, which of the which of the knowledge is uh, which of the knowledge is applicable for the task you are doing, because sometimes all you need is not to sit behind the screen for 8 hours, but to take a material and just do the first prototype and see how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it works for mechanical engineering and electronics too.
In a related note, how do you think our job is going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, obviously, artificial intelligence will do our jobs, right?
I hope
No,
not.
I don't think so, but it's gonna be a valuable tool. Uh, in 10 or 15 years, I have really no idea, but I still believe looking back 10 or 15 years, the things really didn't change a lot. Perhaps simpler, faster, and cheaper manufacturing, especially located in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Change a little bit the way I'm designing electronics. So I don't have to think that hard at the beginning and do more prototypes because it's cheaper, and I can decide which of the prototypes works best and go from that point to later stage of the project.
One of the things that I was actually thinking about these days, um, services like PCB Way, JLC PCB, and other cheap manufacturers for and like accessible manufacturers of PCBs these days have completely revolutionized both like commercial and private like hobby project, because you can now have a PCB in a couple of weeks and it's as good as the best in the industry. Like I've never seen failures on commercial products, like on PCBs that I've ordered. Actually, I've seen commercial products with far worse PCBs in quality than what you can get for $5 from Asia. And that is remarkable. And it's I think it's one of the biggest advantages that people starting the hobby these days have over us, because they'll never know the pain of staining a shirt with ferric chloride, because they won't ever have to touch it.
On a related note, yes, that is surely true. But another thing that differentiates the time from when I was starting to those days is availability of information. Because when I was 10 years or so and I started to dig deeper into electronics, for me there were no other information sources than books, electronics magazines, and personal experience of the few people that I know that were dealing with electronics. So it was quite difficult to get hold on information about components I had. For example, I used transistors, a lot of transistors, and I really didn't know their electronics, their datasheet values, because I had no datasheet at hand. I just knew that okay, this is some silicon NPN transistor. It should be okay with 100 milliamperes and 30 volts of collector voltage, and that was it. And those days, very easy to get data sheet for components. It's very easy to get personal experience of other people around the
Yeah.
world.
Yes, and
And
forums and stuff like
yes,
that.
exactly. YouTube videos even. So it's very valuable resource. Yes, I would say internet was doing or did more impact on the industry than the cheap manufacturing processes. And I still remember the days when internet was fairly new in the late 90s and early uh, early this century. So it really, I believe it made a huge impact on the information and how they spread.
One of the most interesting things for me these days is that not only do we have more accessible information, but we also have more nonsense. So, for example, there's all those videos about free energy and 10 electronics tricks that will blow your mind, and videos from usually Asia with people soldering a 555 timer to a couple of LEDs, and they get a million views. And for me, I don't know, might be a bit of an elitist in this case, but I think it's kind of detrimental to the hobby, because if you go and look for a resource for, I don't know, if I was a kid right now and I was looking for how to make a blinker circuit or something like that, and I find a video with 20 million views on YouTube, and it turns out that it's complete nonsense, then that would be a major disappointment. Because as I was talking to Razvan last time, when you're starting out in a hobby, there's not much, you don't have much financial resource behind the hobby. So every mistake is costly, and it might separate you from it might ruin days or weeks of work and weeks of savings and stuff like that. So it's true that there's far more information available these days, but the necessity to select that information is you have to be more wary of how you choose your sources than you had to back in the day, I think, at least.
Yes, that's unfortunately true. That's the dark side of the information age. As every human invention, this has the dark side too. It's the same for probably every human uh, invention. Like knife could be used for good things and bad things. The same goes for explosive and aeroplanes and so on. So yes, it's probably a requirement for this age to know how to separate useful information from all the rest.
How do you think if somebody's trying to get started in the hobby, what do you think is the best way to go about it?
That's tough question. I really don't know. Uh, but I believe there is no workaround for knowledge. So even if you have all the all the information at hand, even if you have all the development kits you can wish for and have the simulators and whatnot, you still have to be able to grasp all the things and use your creativity to create something new from all those knowledge and information. So even if you have a blinking LED with Arduino in 5 minutes, still there is no workaround for understanding how things do work in inside, and the depth of the understanding. Uh, there is, as usual, the deeper you can go, the better your knowledge or your output is. So you can have fast solution, but you still have the learn the internals.
Yes. This is one of the things that most people starting out in a field confront themselves with. It's the Dunning Kruger effect. Um, it's one of my favorite things. When you get started with something, your horizon is very narrow and you don't know the true extent of a specific field. And you think, oh, how deep can this thing go? And you start learning and reading about it and learning more. And at some point, you realize, well, the rabbit hole goes as deep as you can fathom it, and there's really no end to the refinements people have brought upon the most banal things in life. And when you think that this is applicable to every subject, topic, and discipline that we have around, it's just mind bending.
Yes, exactly. I have to admit that when I was building my first beeper circuit, I had absolutely no idea how it worked, and I was glad it worked somehow, and I was getting the principles over many years later. So it's not easy to um, understand things in all the depth of the field, and to be honest, I'm still learning a lot every day, um, with my work projects or with my hobby projects, and every day I find out there is one more thing to uncover, one more thing I had no idea about, or I had just the uh, fuzzy idea or very rough idea about.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's process that can ever end, and that is also the good thing about the hobby electronics, because I'm doing it to learn something new, to tease my brain. And if there was one day I could say, oh yes, I now I know everything, I would lose the interest the thing, and I would have to find a new hobby.
It wouldn't be satisfying anymore. There wouldn't
Yes,
be
yes,
anything to uncover. Uh,
yes.
there's a couple of other small questions that I have. How much math do you use in your day-to-day life?
Day-to-day life, including traveling and shopping and so, or do you
Job, your
mean
job.
yes? Okay. Uh, well, most of the time, all the math I need is doable as quick calculations in my mind. Uh, so if you want to find the resistor value for your LED at 12 volts, you don't really need calculator very much, or spreadsheet or simulation program. And most of the time, I don't really need much more complicated method than the usual four function calculator can do. But there is always the remaining 1% of the cases when you need some more math, and uh, it would be very difficult if I couldn't solve the math behind it. But again, for most of the work, I don't really need much of mathematics.
But there is one hidden catch here. I agree, you don't need a lot of math, but there is so much um, knowledge that you have to have internalized up to this point for things to become natural that you actually need quite a lot of math. If you know what I'm trying to say. So the principles you might be able to feel and do by intuition, but in order to have arrived at this point, you had to slog your way through a lot of math in university and along the road.
Yes, definitely. The intuition is actually very significant part of the electronics, or and I believe most of the aspects of creative human activities. And the intuition is something that is very difficult to work around or do by other means.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I feel like the intuition is as important as, for example, perhaps music or something, because I in my spare time I do a little bit of music as well. And what I always find interesting, that you can learn about scales, you can learn about modes, you can learn about chords and so on, but nobody tells you what to do with all those information. You cannot do music when all you know are scales and chords.
Mm-hmm. You have to
In the
feel
same
it.
way, in the same way, uh, you can learn all the theory you want, but it won't help you very much with creating and circuits. So
Do you
yes,
play
that's
any
about.
instruments? You said you're a musician. You're a hobby musician? Do you play any instruments?
Yes, I play a little bit of piano and guitar. In the past, I was interested in electronics, musical instruments like theremin was my favorite instruments for a while, and I built a few of them and so on.
Really? That's cool.
Yes.
That's cool. I also play a bit of guitar. We should start a band in this case, but practice sessions are going to be difficult because I think we're a couple of thousand kilometers away. uh, yeah. Uh, okay. Well, that I'm very, very happy actually right now. So this has been an exceptional experience for me for like learning so much about you and the way you think and your approach on the things. And I think everybody who will have the patience to listen up to this point are going to be extremely pleased as well because yeah, but my opinion and the opinion of many other people that I know, you're a very talented individual and have repeatedly shown a great deal of discipline and persistence and perseverance, and you've demonstrated that you're a very competent individual. And I'm not trying to flatter you or anything, but it's just you need to be recognized. I'm going to, with your permission, link your GitHub repository and the description, although you've been featured on Hackaday and but you know, more places for people to find you. And I don't know, do you have any closing remarks, suggestions, life advice? I really love the thing with lunch. What's one thing that you've always enjoyed? It was very unexpected and delightful. So if you have any remarks and life advice for the listeners, I would very much appreciate that.
Well, I really don't think I'm in the position of giving life advices because I still didn't experience everything. I obviously cannot experience everything. So the only thing that really seemed to work for me is doing what I enjoy, and there is always a way to build on the things I enjoy. So yes, that's it. And
That's
thank you for all the praises you said about me. And surely feel free to include any public information you feel like it's useful for you and for the people listening to this discussion.
okay. Thank you for joining, and thank you so much for chatting with me and sharing a bit of your experience and as a closing remark, yeah, I wish you the best of luck on your future projects. I hope you're gonna turn the nanovoltmeter into a very commercially successful project and product, and so I can buy one. And yeah, thank you for joining me again, and um, all the best, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And
Yes, thank you as well for the invitation to this chat. It was very enjoyable, and I think like we really only scratched the surface of
yes, we
this.
did.
So feel free to invite me again if you feel like
We will
it's
do this again for
okay.
the benefit of the listeners and for everybody else. So, everybody else, thank you for listening. If you've made it so far, you have my most sincere thanks. And that's about it. Have a wonderful day and say goodbye, Jaromir.
Bye bye.
Bye.